Okay, so I wanted to just kind of go over a couple things because of kind of an introduction. I didn't know how much you know about me, but I went to Art Center for illustration. My mother was an artist. My father is an art director. So I kind of was always around art, just kind of enjoyed that. But what I did was I went to school for that. But I realized shortly after that I was really interested in painting. So when I graduated, I ended up painting, and I was painting for galleries and stuff for about 6 years. And then I got involved in animation. These were just some images I painted a while ago. This was up in San Francisco. I was doing a movie with ILM, and so I was up there for a little while. And I decided I had seen this. Actually, I went over to paint this exhibition building. Or exposition building. So I saw this and I thought, well, I want to go over and paint that. And once I did that, I took a 20 by 24, I guess. I took this over, I started painting that, and I painted about 25 minutes. And I had to break because the lighting had changed. So I was packing it up. And as I was packing up and starting to walk away, I saw this. And I thought, wow, that lighting's even better. I like that better. So I came back the next day with 2 canvases and worked on the first one some more, and then I worked on this one for about 20 minutes, and then by the time I had worked on this, the sun had set and traffic was busy. So what I did was I went and got something to eat, and I thought, okay, I'll drive back after dark. And when I did, I thought, okay, well, I'll just take a swing by this place. And when I did, it was artificially lit and looked something like that. So I took a picture of that. And with those 3, I wanted to really look and try to diagnose what's the difference with the lighting, the color between these different times of day. What makes something look different in different times of day? So with these, I went back and kind of invented this one because I was looking at other paintings and the kind of morning and the atmosphere, the real warm, cold temperature changes and flat lighting that you might get in this kind of a hazy fog. So I was playing with that, to just experience and kind of express that. So this, as far as color and value, those are my kind of explorations there. After I was painting, I started working at Disney, and a lot of these were working from the film and game business. This is just the top one here is a little concept sketch, just a little idea of some of the crazy roadside attractions around the United States. And so I was playing with that. This one was a Pandora, was a little moment there. And then some location sketches there. Other sketches, which this was, the top one was, let me get in here. Okay, so the top one was made up. That was supposed to be the entrance to a big museum. So it was just kind of contrived. This was an image from a film festival in France. And the one thing that I'll point out about this, I'll start talking about a little bit of the compositional things. I used 3 values, black, white, and a gray. These were done on Post-its, that's why they're yellow. But I would start with that because if you limit yourself to just black, white, and gray, and you can create a design that actually holds together, and your lights feed into darks, darks feed into the lights, and there's no ambiguity, then you can make a clear image. And it's about our first thing that we're going to be doing is really looking at how we make a clear image. And the other thing with something this small, what I'll do is I'll look at these different zones, and you can see that in the area where the trees are, it's kind of scribbled lines. The roof, there's these straight lines, and then the grass area, there might be little dots or whatever. I also realized that you could designate textures into different zones as well and still get another level of dimension. But even then, it's still just a sketch. It's still just a suggestion, but you can be, even if it's a complicated issue, you can be very clear about it. We were going to do a kind of a Cars World project. That's why the car has eyeballs on it. But other than that, this was the kind of some back alleys in Boston. Some more back alleys. A few storyboards for an animated project. Location designs for a Dalmatian sequel, their Dalmatian plantation. And again, with things like this, I'm a long shot, a vista like this. I want to make sure I've got a clear foreground, midground, background. And so that's really what I was kind of looking at with some of this. The others are just explorations of how Pooh falls over this little hillside chased by bees and ends up running into rabbits. So let's see, after that, this is more, this is like a Robin Hood book cover kind of a thing. So I was trying to just capture a moment for that. These were designs as a kind of real contrived world. We were going to design Fantasia 2000. There was a sequence with Pines of Rome as the principal music. And I was trying to design something that was, kind of bigger than life. So I was playing with shapes. The shapes were really important. And then the value structure. I played up the value structure for those shapes. Later, this was Zootopia. And I put all these things together. Just to give you an example, I really like a broad range of, kind of being forced to explore different types of drawing and painting styles and, trying to do different things. So these were all kind of fun and different. So it was a lot of fun to get into. And then there's different moments. This was from Tangled, and there's different moments where we try to get a lot of expression out of the different moments. We'll often do this in order to kind of visualize the whole movie as a total. But that's kind of where my effort has been in the last 30-something years, 35 years. When we get specific about composition, this is kind of why we're here. There's something that's interesting to me, and I've talked to a lot of students that have come to the class, and the big question is, composition is a big topic. And it's like, how do we narrow it down? And what I've realized over the years is, I think like a lot of us, I went to school and, learned certain rules. And, there is and I was given these certain rules, like don't make tangents and, things that would cause some visual tension. They were, said don't do those things. And we'll talk about those. But what I realized later, and when I started exploring more and researching more, there's a lot of those types of rules that are made up for a good reason. And the reason is to get all of us to draw or paint in a certain way, or to be able to put down what we see. And those things can help us start, but at some point we kind of hear the term that you have to learn the rules and then break the rules. And what I've realized is that it's really not a case of those rules at all. And though they may be good to start out with and good to get you to be able to represent what you see, what ends up happening is we do have a visual language, and that's where I'm really going to focus in the class. There is a visual language that makes up, we express ourselves with this language. And when you become a little more literate with this visual language and learn what to look for, then you can improve your assessment skills. And that's a huge part, so that you're able to look at your work, diagnose what's wrong with it, and make it better. And learning to teach yourself is really, really what I'm really after, because I think that we can do that, but you have to be aware of what to look for and what to do. A couple of little tip-offs. It's like this image is, before the idea of composition was so big, it's a tangled bowl of noodles is really the way I felt about it. Whereas like DNA, we had no idea what we were made of. But once they start diagnosing DNA, they realize that, it's just a small handful of components. But the way they're put together is really the thing that makes all the difference. And then I heard a radio broadcast, and there was a NASA scientist who was asked if there was anything in space. It was a vacuum or whatever. And his reply surprised me because he said, I don't know. And I'm thinking, here's somebody that should know all of this stuff, and they're saying, I don't know. But his answer was, there could be a great many things in space. We just don't know how to look at them. We look at things through the effect of light. That's what we know. That's our world. That's how we perceive things in our world. But there could be things out there that are not based on the effect of light. Things that are transparent to the effect of light, or anything you can imagine. And if we don't know how to look at them, we don't know how to assess them. And that brought it right back home to me in terms of art. Because until we have some criteria, how do we look at work? How do we look at artwork? How do we break it down? We don't know what to build on. So like I said, I'm going to have the blog. I'm going to paraphrase some of this, but composition, when it's understood, is about the presentation of the artist's selection and manipulation and orchestration of the visual elements. Out of all of these elements, they do not have any predetermined value. And that's one thing that's kind of important to know, is that, one element isn't more important than the other. It's what you do, how you put them together. Okay, that's the way it really is. The things really come together. And there's a lot of ways that people try to make that easy by creating rules and stuff like that. And some of the more common efforts to simplify the process through the setting of rules for techniques are attempting visual grammar only serve to create a situation with predictable outcomes that inhibit artists from exploring the possibilities free from personal bias. And I found this out, because once I became an art director, I actually created a document. It was a style guide for animation. It was the first style guide that we had for the world. Characters and character designs often had style guides, but we never had one before that would define how the world looks and how the world works. And so I started taking on that task and realized that what I was doing was creating rules to make all of the artwork look the same. And I realized, that was a big, big task. But at the same time, it's the inverse that's important for us. What are the rules, or what are not the rules, or what's the language of visual that we have in our visual art that will allow us to explore our own point of view, our own ideas. And of course, it's going to rely heavily in the beginning on observation skills. So a lot of drawing and painting is really, really important to build your observation skills. And then it's your visual assessment skills, how you break things down. That becomes very important. But usually, if we don't get to that point, and this is something that we don't often do, it's not written about a lot in books. I have some references that I've used, different books that I'm cross-referencing for the information for this course, but it's not real common information. Most of the information that we pick up is how to render form. It's all really still about how we render form and stuff. And some of those rules are the general rules. You got to figure they help you generalize or basically water down your work, And so we'll kind of step beyond that. So as far as the way I look at rules, they may serve the beginner, but as you mature as an artist, it's important to understand the value between those rules. And that if you focus on observation skills, some of those rules, those are good rules. If you focus on your drawing skills, that's possibly helpful. But there's rules involved there, like draw something this way, draw something that way. You got to watch those. So be careful about those. And then there's rules that promote techniques and styles. And what I found is a lot of the rules do that. They're about technique. If you want to draw this way, do this, and it'll be a step-by-step or whatever, and you can draw just like that person. Well, if that's your end goal, to draw just like that person, then you're doing the right steps. If you want to learn how to draw things and invent things, or express yourself and find your own vision, yeah, you're going to have to let those rules go, and you're going to have to find your own or build outside of those. So oftentimes, the divergence away from our visual language are any rules that really support techniques and styles. So I get really cautious about techniques and styles and rules. Not that it's a bad thing. If you want to do that, then you would follow those kinds of things. But just put that on the back burner, that you want to think about that and question those. Any of the rules that promise balance, harmony, or creating a more beautiful image, forget about it. Get rid of them. Because all of those kinds of rules, those will always bring you down to doing the same old image over and over and over. And that's the difficult thing that I see in this. So that's just a thing. So as you come across, different rules, or maybe you can check the ideas or rules that you've learned, kind of put them in the categories. Is it a good one? Is it one that will inhibit you, or what? So just kind of take stock of where you are with stuff. There's a book out. It's called Before, Ever, After, and I suggest that one because Before Ever After was written, and it's a collection of the notes that some of the early animators gave to one another. Walt Disney had Don Graham and other people come in and teach and lecture, and those notes are in the book. And what they talked about was really kind of timely. And the one thing that I really enjoyed was, we look at something like Snow White and say, it was a great landmark movie. If you read the notes in there after Snow White, they were extremely harsh and critical on themselves. They were very articulate and they broke down everything. They said, okay, we laughed at this. Why did we laugh at this? What makes a joke funny? How do we do that? So what they did basically is they broke down and they were assessing every move they made and open about it. And they were trying to figure out why things worked and didn't work. The result being they gained assessment skills. And that's what we want to do. Because they're not afraid to break down their own work, they could stand back and assess where they were, break it down, and move on. So it was good. And they became more visually literate as a result. Okay? So we're going to focus on, in this class, we're going to focus on basically these four fundamental things in the class. One are what are our visual components and the nature of this visual language. Okay? We want to understand that framework. And then we want to look at our own activity, our assessment skills. How do we assess things? Well, like the DNA, we don't know how to look at it until we know what to look at. So I'm going to break that down for you. And then we want to look at image clarity. These are the two major things as you're doing your work. First is clarity, okay? You're working on your drawing skills and stuff so that you can represent something clear enough to be able to express variations on that. And the fourth thing is your image message. As an artist, what do you want to say? And as I started out doing landscape paintings, I wanted to capture the time of day. But as time went on, I started thinking, well, what do I want to say about this landscape? What do I want to say personally about this? What kind of comment do I want to make on this? And that changed everything for me in terms of how I would approach the landscape. So, when you kind of face those big changes, it's kind of hard to let go of some things, but that's the growth that we kind of go through. It's kind of hard. So to start off, we'll take a look at our visual components and what are those elements that we look at. Now, I compiled the list of some of these from some different books. Now, this one was A Primer to Visual Literacy by Donis A. Dondas. It's a small paperback. It's a great little book. It's really dense with its information. And she puts emphasis on these specific elements. Dot, line, shape, direction, tone, color, texture, dimension, scale, and movement. And then The Art of Color and Design. This was Maitland Graves. And you can get this at used book places or online too. It's pretty inexpensive as well. He broke things down into line, value, shape, proportion, color, direction, and texture. Bruce Bloch wrote a book called The Visual Story, and he was really taking Donis A. Dondas's work and simplifying it, focused on film. So this is really about filmmaking. It's a good, swift, quick little read if you're interested in that kind of a thing. But it's a good book too. It's worth mentioning. Composition by Arthur Dow. This was done in 1922, but he broke things down into line, notan, and color. Now we'll talk about that. It was interesting. He didn't have any mention of form at all. He lumped that into color. Or form was one aspect of putting different values and hues next to one another. And Dow studied with the Post-Impressionists, and so he had some influences of like Cézanne and Gauguin and those guys. Donald Graham, who taught the Disney artists in the beginning, he actually took the information from Dow, and so there's a really kind of a direct lineage from those guys into the studio. And then he also talks about these three things, line, notan, and color, as our components, but then he talks about principles of composition, of opposition, transition, subordination, repetition, and symmetry. It's interesting that these are separated and they're the characteristics that are the outcomes. That's the way they put them, the characteristics. Robert Beverly Hale dealt with line, light and planes, and mass. Composing pictures, Don Graham, subject, graphic elements, point, area, line, light and dark, value, the graphic accent, the matrix, measuring depth, graphic movement, directing the eye, space, space and nature, graphic space, and scale. These were some of the books that I gathered information. What I tried to do is, as I was reading through these and going through for myself, just researching, what I realized was, in a lot of cases, they were saying the same thing. They were just identifying those components just a little differently. So I tried to cross-reference things and kind of distill them down to something that could make sense, that I could work with, and it came down to this. And I put this together for some film classes as well, so I kind of crossed over with movement at the bottom here, but line, tone, shape, color, space, and rhythm. And these are some visual components that we use that make up our visual language. So these are our predominant components. And we're going to spend the next 2 weeks going over each of these. We'll take one at a time, and we'll focus on each one of these. And just so that you get comfortable with looking at images and kind of pulling the strength of a line, or pulling the strength of tone or shape or color, and seeing what it can do to help or enhance or what's affecting your composition. Outside of just the visual components, we're talking about here as line or actual line, there's implied lines, there's closure created by dots or points or focal points, eye lines, tracking lines. We'll get into all of this as we go through each one. But I put this in here to show you each of these major components has specific characteristics that we'll go over in the class. Now, we've got these components, but now, what do you do with the components? Well, we need some way to measure these components when we look and visually do these things. And maybe what you can do is just in your sketchbook, what I want you to do is just simply write down major key and minor key. I mean, just for yourself. And I'm going to do that with you. And minor key. See, when I was in school, I learned that we have, I heard about, like in a color class, they talked about your tonal key. Okay? And if I said it was high key, you might think it's overall light. If it's low key, they might say that for overall dark. But that was all the information I got. And it didn't cross over into other components because I didn't learn those things in school. And so this was information that was really, I looked at Maitland Graves, who was really talking about this and made this really clear, that your major key is really about proportion. So within a given image, you might have mostly light and compared to a small amount of dark. Okay? So I'm just putting down a symbol for our major key. It's about proportion. So that's what you're measuring. Now it could be overall light to dark. It could be overall shapes, mostly squares or mostly rectangles or geometric shapes, in contrast to more organic or circular types of shapes. It could be, any of our visual components can be measured by a major and minor key. Whatever makes up your image mostly, that would be your major key. So you could have, I'm going to back up here, and you could have a major key of line, of tone, of shape, of color, of space. Maybe mostly the space that you render is deep space, but you have a couple flatter space elements in there. Well, that would be your range of contrast between that deep space and some elements of flat space. That would become your minor key. So your minor key is your range of contrast. And I'm going to do this with 3 circles just because we can. And I'm going to say, okay, the first one here is the greatest contrast. Okay, it's black and white, it's your greatest contrast. So your minor key is your range of contrast. Okay, that's a range of contrast within your image. Okay. Now you can have a situation where I'll do this. Now the first image here is like 50-50 as far as proportion, right? And it has a white and it has a black. Our other range of contrast can be like white and a light gray, like this middle one, okay? Now, you could have an overall proportion of white, but your range of contrast never gets this dark. In a high-key painting, it may only get here, okay? Or you could be in a situation where it could be mostly dark, but your range of contrast is minimal as well, and you're looking at something like that. So in these two cases, your second and third circle diagram down here, the first one would be a major key, a high major key, right? It's overall light, right? And it have a low minor key, low contrast, okay? So this would be a low contrast. And then the third one would also be low contrast, so it'd be a low minor key. But its major key would be low as well. So it's low major and low minor key. These are just little symbols on here, but we'll find that as we get into these, it's really going to determine the mood of your image. Value has a really strong effect on the mood, and we'll explore that.